Hello and welcome to this Greg Talk. According to the internet, around 13.8 billion years ago there was a singularity of quasary proportions, and what is known as the Big Bang happened, and everything contained within the singularity sprayed out in all directions. As the universe cooled, subatomic particles formed. Then later, basic atoms such as hydrogen and helium began to begin. Over time, and due to gravity, these clustered together, forming stars, galaxies, and later planets. 4.6 billion years ago, a solar system called the Solar System formed around a sun called the Sun, after the gravitational collapse of a giant interstellar molecular cloud. A number of terrestrial planets formed around the Sun, and further out, gas and ice giants started their lonely trudge into ecliptic eternity. What is now the third planet from the Sun is currently called Earth, and at the moment it sits in what has been termed the Goldilocks zone. This zone is named after the character Goldilocks from the fairy tale Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Now, fairy tales are folklore stories which usually encompass magical and or mythical creatures or objects and often have an explicit moral bent. The character Goldilocks enters a house. A house is usually an enclosed space in which humans choose to spend their time and hoard objects they've accumulated in their lives. However, this being a fairy tale, the house that Goldilocks enters doesn't belong to humans, but three anthropomorphic bears. Traditionally, in the real world of planet Earth, bears are a mammalian or mammary gland feeding invertebrate hairy or furry animals with a triptych of middle ear bones that diverged from other life forms such as reptiles and birds during the late Triassic period just over 200 million years ago. At this stage, I should probably explain time. Time is the measure of the seemingly irreversible journey through existence, which we hominids mark by counting the rotations of our planet Earth around our sun, the Sun. The latter is marked in years, while the former is counted in days, which are then divided into hours, then minutes, then seconds, and so on. So, just over 200 million years ago, or 73 billion days ago, that's a modern British billion, equivalent to an older British 73 milliard days, mammals, of which bears are a modern example, comprising 8 varieties. The magical anthropomorphic bears that Goldilocks encountered were angry bears. Now, angry bears are not a subspecies of the generic term bear. These are brown, polar, Asian black, American black, sun, sloth, spectacled, and panda. Instead, the angry refers to their emotional state. Now, emotions are different modes that cognitive creatures can fall into based on their chemical makeup, surroundings, and circumstances. We mainly understand these emotional modes or states based on the hominoid range, which comprises of many subcategory emotions that fall into 6 broader basic emotions known as happy, excited, tender, scared, angry, and sad. We understand the hominid range better because we, you and I assume, are humans, or hominids, or humanoids. Goldilocks was also a human. In fact, most think of her as a woman-human. Humans, as with most Earth creatures, fall into 2 main types based on sex, male and female. However, these are not the only 2 types of reproductive sexual classification. Within these categories, there are many subdivisions. As I say, we think that Goldilocks was mainly female. Humans and bears shares an ancestor that died out 85 million years ago. Goldilocks' bears were angry, and as she had ventured into their house or home, their dwelling if you will, and eaten their porridge. Porridge is a food commonly eaten at breakfast, made with boiled starchy plants, usually grain, ordinarily mixed with water. 2 hydrogen atoms joined with 1 oxygen atom on the base level, a clear liquid to the naked eye on the other levels. Or milk, the product of a mammal's mammary glands primarily, but not exclusively from those of a cow, although goats, oats and coconuts are now commonly milked. Goldilocks has also sat in the bears' chairs and slept in their beds. This makes them angry because they feel that the space they cordoned off for themselves in this fictitious version of Earth has been entered without their permission. The Goldilocks zone in which our planet sits is so named because in the fairy tale, Goldilocks finds 2 of the beds, chairs and porridges to be far from her taste, while the third of each object is seen as just right. So, the area in which our planet orbits the sun we call the sun, it was perfect or just right for life to come to life. Around 4.5 billion years ago, our planet was supposedly formed. Over millions of years, water congregated into the oceans and a primordial stew developed. Microbial mats of coexisting bacteria and archaea evolved through what was essentially errors in their replication, and one of these errors, photosynthesis, caught on. Photosynthesis allowed light energy to be converted to chemical energy within cells, which could then be stored and later released to fuel a cell's activities. Over many millions of years, these cells joined and formed more complex life forms, and with each reproduction, slight variations occurred, leading to new species and genetic advantages. Multicellular life evolved into plants and mollusks, arthropods, and then dinosaurs. Over time, and possibly due to a cataclysmic event, these great beasts gave way to smaller, wilier creatures, until life settled into the 7 kingdoms we know today: bacteria, archaea, protozoa, chromista, plants, fungus, and animals, into which we are classified. 15 million years ago, one of our ancestors was a gibbon-type lesser ape, a four-limbed, mainly upright, hairy, warm-blooded creature that reproduces when 2 sexes combine cells. The gibbon propagated, and natural selection and genetic deviations eventually led to the earliest hominids around 3.6 million years ago. The gibbon propagated, and natural selection and genetic deviations eventually led to the earliest hominins around 3.6 million years ago. The Homo sapien lineage, of which I, and I assume you, are part, has been estimated to be around 300,000 years old as a species. As a species, Homo sapiens, we, survived by reproducing. To achieve this, we must survive to an age when our bodies are sexually mature, whereby we are able to copulate and reproduce, thus continuing the growth of the species. To enable young Homo sapiens to grow, they must consume other matter so their body can absorb it and grow larger, stronger, and more mature. Typically, this matter is from the kingdom of plants, fungus. This matter is from the kingdoms of plants, fungus, and/or animals, although species from the other kingdoms are often imbibed also, sometimes with fatal effects. When humans ingest useful foodstuffs, the body immediately starts to break the matter down into the smallest possible component parts to allow it to be easily absorbed and used by the body. Hard enamel-coated teeth contained in the mouth rip, tear, crush and grind food morsels to start this process. Inside the mouth, salivary glands produce a liquid, saliva, which both lubricates the mastication process and also adds tiny enzymes which break food particles down into simpler structures. A muscle within the mouth, which goes by the name of the tongue, helps roll the food into a roundish shape known as a bolus to make swallowing simpler. When a bolus starts its journey from the mouth to the anus, it starts by passing into the pharynx or throat before quickly hitting the esophagus. The esophagus is a relatively straight tube within the body which uses muscles to contract and relax, a process called peristalsis, which is triggered by the presence of food in the pharynx and forces the food bolus down the body and towards the stomach. The stomach is a sac-like expansion of the digestive system, shaped like a stomach and containing 4 regions, also like a stomach. Strong muscles within the stomach pulverize the food to break it down mechanically, while at the same time enzymes digest it biologically, and a strong hydrochloric acid dissolves it and any harmful microorganisms present within it chemically. Next, the what was food matter passes into the pylorus and then into the duodenum, where bile from the gallbladder and pancreatic enzymes help to remove even more good stuff from the goopy mess. The small intestine muscles perform their own peristalsis, forcing the food through while absorbing more of its nutrients and nourishment. At the end of the small intestine is the large intestine, or colon. In reality, though, it should be called the wide intestine, and the small intestine, the skinny intestine, is actually the small intestine is much longer than the large intestine. The matter passes the appendix, which might have helped to digest grass in the olden days. Who really knows, though? And water and electrolytes are removed at the stage of the colon. All that is left after this step is fecal matter. This useless mass of enzymes and unusable organic matter then hits our rectum and needs to be expelled, usually through the anus. The anus is a muscular sphincter that we have a certain degree of control over. This enables us to defecate largely at our leisure and in a place or convenience that is convenient. Thousands of years ago, this would have involved going under a bush, into a hole, or while sitting in a tree. Around 4,000 years ago, inhabitants of what is now northwestern India may have had some kind of drainage system to dispose of their leavings, although it's not clear if this was the case. However, in 3000 BC, some Scots definitely had toilets, as did the Greek palace of Knossos, built in 1700 BC. It's from this that the euphemism, "hold my pint while I visit the palace of Knossos," should have been born. By 315 AD, Romans had nearly 150 public toilets to choose from in Rome, and would use the occasion to chat to friends and catch up on gossip, as these were communal toilets and there were no phones. The phrase "to get the wrong end of the stick" became popular around this time, as Romans would cleanse their anuses post-poop with a sponge on the end of a stick, which they would then rinse and leave for the next person. Picking up the sponge end was clearly not a desirable thing to do, probably because some pranksters or lazy blokes wouldn't wash the sponge. In medieval England, people would do their business into a bowl or potty and throw it out the window afterwards. Their stools, that is, not the potties. Those rich enough to own a moated property would have a hole in the floor of their domicile that protruded over the water, where they would deposit their wastage. A larger communal version of this system existed over the Thames for the peasants to utilise. As a result, the river stank and harboured diseases. What's its excuse now then? The potty evolved into what was called a commode, essentially a potty in a box. Elizabeth I's godson, Sir John Harrington, invented the first crude flushing toilet in 1592. Sadly, it didn't catch on initially, but in 1775, Alexander Cummings developed the S-shaped pipe at the base of the toilet. This was a breakthrough because it meant that odours were kept out of the room once flushing occurred. 19th century population boom meant that many people had to share single toilets, and rivers could not cope with the extra waste. The drinking water which was drawn from these rivers was brown and contained many waterborne diseases. In the 1830s and 1850s, cholera outbreaks laid waste to much of the population. In 1848, the government decreed that every new house should contain a WC, or water closet, to give its full euphemistic name. 1848 saw the Great Stink, after rotting sewage was baked in the heat. In 1861, hero of the toilet movement, Thomas Crapper, from where we gain the slang term crap for faeces and or defecation, was hired by Prince Edward, who later transformed into King Edward VII. The royal prince charged him with installing lavatories in several royal palaces. 4 years later, in 1865, London got its first sewer system. The 20th century saw flushable valves, water tanks resting on the bowl instead of suspended above it, and toilet paper, the modern equivalent of the sponge on a stick. So how does a toilet work? Mains water enters through a pipe and fills the cistern or water tank. As the water level rises, the stopcock is raised until it compresses a valve and stops the inflow of water. Should this malfunction in some way, there is a failsafe in the form of a wastewater pipe which carries excess water away and prevents flooding, an abundance of water. Once the water tank is full and someone has deposited their dung into the pan or toilet bowl, they close the lid. This acts as a barrier which catches most airborne fecal matter and redirects it back into the toilet bowl. The human then pulls the handle, which raises a spring-loaded tube via a wire, which in turn carries up a diaphragm with an enclosed pipe system. Due to the siphon effect, the water displaced by the diaphragm attracts and drags other water molecules over the precipice of the N-shaped pipe and down into the toilet bowl, where gravity and the weight of the water carries away any detritus in the bowl. It's carried around the S or U bend and out of the building and into the sewer system, where eventually it reaches a treatment plant and is recycled into drinking water. Yummy. Meanwhile, back in the toilet, the ballcock falls with the water level, the siphon effect ends, and the system begins to fill with fresh water from the main supply. The level in the bowl returns to its normal height, and any unpleasant gases or odours are locked out by a body of water within the bend in the pipe. In theory, that should happen. Let's cast our minds back a few days to Task 82. Task 82. Write the best idea on a beer mat. Here's one I created moments ago. It says, fix your damn toilet, because quite frankly, I'm fed up of going in a bucket in the garden. I need to go and fix the loo. My toilet, you see, was broken. When the handle was engaged, there was no siphon effect, just an annoying noise. So I bought spare parts and set about draining the cistern using a combination of short length of hose and the siphon effect, followed by the loosening of the excess water egress pipe and installing a small bucket beneath to catch the falling water. Upon attempting to replace the plastic parts present within the cistern, it became apparent that the new items would not fit the ornate and narrow cistern, and that the builders had installed on my property many years hence. Then I had... it's so boring. I've not even made a joke for ages. Can't do this anymore. Still not fixed. I can't keep going in a bucket in the garden. Gotta fix it. I've gotta fix it! Sorry for that waste of your time. That Greg Talk was brought to you by Task 134, find and demonstrate the most complicated toilet, and even my dogs were heckling me, it was that boring.